at&t.com. With me today for a conversation in reference to everything from the Public Safety Alliance to FirstNet to COVID-19 are Dick Mirgon, public safety consultant, and Chuck Dowd, a retired NYPD deputy chief. Chuck was part of the original Public Safety Alliance, as well as one of the first members of the FirstNet Authority board when it was created. So it's been 8 years, Chuck and Dick, since the law was enacted. Things have been moving forward. And so, in your opinion, Chuck, where are we now? And how does it relate to the situation we're in with this COVID-19 stuff?
Good morning, Brett. Hi, Dick. Happy to be with you today. You know, guys, it's amazing that it's been 8 years. And then that's just since the inception of the legislation. I mean, we started this, when, Dick, I would say 11 years ago, right?
I think it was 08, as I recall.
Yeah. And the good old days, right, Dick? Where we were given less than a zero chance of ever being successful in getting a hold of that spectrum, which ultimately created FirstNet.
Yeah, which like all great ideas, this one kind of started in a restaurant over drinks one night. You, Chris Moore, JJ, and I.
Hey, well, listen, no great story ever started with I was having a salad. You know what I mean? So yeah, we're having drinks, right? So and as we said all along, if we'd have known in the beginning what we knew at the end when we got the legislation passed, we never even gotten started to begin with. But here we are today, and FirstNet is a reality, right, guys?
Absolutely,
it's out there, it's being built. My sense of it is, as a former NYPD guy who ran the New York City 911 and police communications for a dozen years during 9/11, during Hurricane Sandy, during the blackout, all of those things, I think, were impetus to get us to where we are today. I think, Dick, you have a good sense of that, right, Brent? This is what we wanted, right?
Sure, absolutely.
And now we're in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and New York has sadly become ground zero for that. But it's just not a New York City story again. This is a nationwide thing. And what's fascinating about that is, Dick, you and I, we've had a million discussions about this over the years with you, me, Chris Moore, Jeff Johnson, and others. I don't think we ever specifically envisioned a pandemic, but it certainly is what, in my mind anyway, and I'd like to hear what you have to say about it, Dick, in my mind is exactly what we created FirstNet for. It's the kind of situation that we created it for.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that, we looked at it as a national level because San Francisco could have that next big earthquake, or LA, another Katrina along the Gulf Coast.
Yep.
But, as far as something impacting the whole nation and the need for interoperable communications, it just doesn't get any bigger than this. It just doesn't get any more critical, as literally we see hundreds of lives being lost every day.
Right.
Need for interoperable communications, and something this big, as far as nationally, almost always will. If New York isn't one of the starting places, it will be a major impact just because of the sheer size and people inside New York City.
Yeah, and so again on 9/11, if you would ask the NYPD or the FDNY would they ever need outside help, and we would have politely just kind of smiled at you and said, thanks, but no thanks. Well, we found out differently on 9/11. We found out differently during Hurricane Sandy, right? These emergencies are nationwide and even global at this point, and the ability to share information rapidly and reliably was what FirstNet, in my mind, was all about. This is the kind of thing that we needed, and by the way, it's getting used for that. And it's I don't know about you, Dick, but for me personally, it's very satisfying to see that we have something out there right now that we envisioned was needed, not seeing this pandemic as the reason for it, but looking at it, sitting back now and looking at it and saying, this is exactly why we did this. This is exactly why we put in all this effort. This is exactly why, all those trips to Washington, all those trips all over the country to unify public safety and get them involved with this. That's what this is about. APCO, IACP, the fire chiefs, the firefighters, FOP, everybody on board, and the payoff is now.
Yeah,
Here's the payoff.
one of the stories that's out there that is probably one of the most compelling is here you had a scenario where hundreds of ambulances were getting staged from a variety of different companies coming in to support New York City.
Yep.
They're sitting there going, we don't have any way to communicate.
Right.
Yeah, and the answer was FirstNet. And FirstNet deployed, and boom, they were there and they were on it.
100% digital capability, the ability to bring in literally hundreds of ambulances from around the country. It didn't matter where they came from. That used to be a huge communications problem back in the day. If you remember during Hurricane Katrina, the NYPD sent a whole caravan of vehicles down to the New Orleans area during Hurricane Sandy. And the problem with that is they had all kinds of communications capability with them, but that communications capability was local to New York City. Now, I give my guys credit, and I didn't think of it. They're way smarter than me. The guys that worked in our radio shop, they found a bridge with an antenna on it, with a control box at the base of the bridge, and they connected it, and they put up a radio system, a one send and transmit and receive radio site in the area that covered about 25 miles because of the terrain. They could do it, right? And they put up a radio system using spare radios from the NYPD and put them out. Now, great stuff, good thinking, but think about that back then during that, and look at what we're doing today. We don't have to think about doing things like that. We don't have to get that creative. And as good as that was and gave them a 25-mile range, the range of FirstNet, the ability to digitally send information and receive information is only limited by what you want to cover, what you yourself want to cover.
Because here you have these ambulances from different companies. I think, weren't they staged in Connecticut or somewhere outside the city?
Yep. Yeah.
So here you've got them staged in one state, operating in another state and another city, still communicating with each other. I mean, something no single public safety network can do.
Right. And in the old days, and again, going back to 9/11, when we had help come in from all over the place, unfortunately for the NYPD, we were the kind of agency that had older radios that were still serviceable that we could use to hand out, right? But that's not something that happens everywhere. And that's something that's not easily done logistically. This, again, there's no thought process to, am I going to be able to communicate? Is the FDNY EMS going to be able to send me information? Am I going to be able to send information to hospitals? It happens organically. And that was the vision of FirstNet when we started. So again, Dick, and Brent, I just feel tremendously satisfied that this is having the impact that it's having. And what's good about the impact and why it's working is you're not hearing complaints about communications capability or the ability to send and share information. You're hearing all about the real issues, the medical issues, the focus on where do we need to get patients to, how to treat patients. We're not thinking about how do we talk to each other. And that to me just illustrates the value of what we did.
Yeah, I mean, great point. I mean, how many disasters do we always hear about? We can't communicate, we can't share information, we can't talk.
And you're not hearing that here. You're not hearing anything like that, right?
Right.
Well, and certainly both of you two, I think that proves the point. That the 9/11 Commission wrote about lack of communication, and Chuck, you just said it. That's not an issue anymore. Now it's taken us a long time to get here, and then that's unfortunate. But we are here, and as like you said, we're not hearing about that at all. I can remember after even small regional events, in after the fact briefings, that's always the issue. Was always the issue. Communications.
You couldn't talk to this guy. I couldn't talk to this guy. This guy couldn't talk to me. All of that stuff. You haven't heard any of that in this situation. None of it.
And I think that's the ultimate end result, and the thing that everybody should be proud of is that it's working. It's working as it was foreseen to work. It is connecting people. And you even mentioned hospitals. When the Alliance was first put together, it was public safety. And look how far it's expanded now. It's hospitals. It's alarm systems. It's a number of things that improve that communication that we all complained about after every event in the past.
Well,
go ahead, Dick. Yeah.
And one of the ability, you were talking about, adding that temporary repeater site, but one of the abilities that FirstNet has that, another great story out there is when the ship came in and docked, they had coverage,
right?
But they were concerned that they needed to have enough capacity for all the data because of all the testing and bringing in patients. So what did FirstNet do? They rolled out a cell on wheels. They put it there on the docks, got in fiber backhaul, and they created their own little bubble to make sure that they had the capacity they needed if it got that bad.
And just as importantly, Dick, with the priority it needed, right?
Yeah,
right.
Priority, which is key, because you could roll in a dozen cells on wheels, right? And it would obviously increase your capacity, but without that prioritization, that FirstNet prioritization, right, you can still run into trouble. I remember when we had a ticker tape parade from my beloved Yankees, and it's been a while since they've won the World Series, right? 2009.
Maybe a while before they played baseball.
No. This year we're in. Don't worry about it. But 2009 was the last Yankee ticker tape parade because that was the last championship. And I remember in our prep for that parade, we had carriers bring in at least 8 or 9 cells on wheels that were set up along the Broadway parade route, right, in Lower Manhattan. And even with all that additional capacity, we were cut off from the ability to effectively communicate on broadband networks. And that was just simply volume, sheer volume. There was so many people there. A couple million people showed up for that parade, and everybody wants to send a video, and everybody wants to send a photo, and everybody wants to talk to their friend. Hey, look at me! I'm at the ticker tape parade, and those systems just got saturated, and became in effect useless to public safety.
Yeah, probably the only negative about FirstNet is when it's working, you don't know it. When you're out there and that call's going through every time, you got the bandwidth you need, and you don't have a communications problem, and you're sitting there worried about other stuff, you don't realize that that's happening because of FirstNet.
Right. So again, that goes back to what we already talked about here, which is, hey, come on, we're talking about the fact that we're not getting complaints about communications. And listen, that's the history of public safety, right? We get noticed when we screw up. That's when we get noticed, right? If you look at 911, those 4 911 operators and dispatchers, in their efforts, and they have done. They've done a fantastic job under very difficult circumstances. Obviously, I'm not there anymore, but I talk to folks about how they're doing. I talk to some of them that are retired, that are talking to, that I'm very close with, that they're still working there. And those folks, they do a Herculean job of taking those calls, getting them processed, getting help to folks. When do they get noticed? They don't get noticed for that. They're almost invisible. They get noticed when there's a problem, right? That's when they get noticed. And so it's the same thing with the communications capability. It's working so well, nobody notices it. Why? Because it's getting the job done. That's why.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
And it can only get better as they move on. You know, they have, I don't know, whatever it is, 1.3 mil users or whatever, but it's going to keep expanding and there's going to be more users. It'll keep moving. And God forbid we have another major event while this is going on. But the good thing is it'll work. It's proven it'll work, whether it's New York, San Francisco, New Orleans, wherever it is, it's going to work. And again, that was the purpose.
Yeah, like the other carriers, you know, you don't have to pick up the phone and call them and say, "Mother, may I please have priority? Mother, will you give me more bandwidth? Mother, would you please, not throttle my bandwidth?" FirstNet's automatic. It is public safety, mission critical, and it's always on, always priority, always preemption.
Well, again, and one of the things we always talked about, when we were in front of Congress, whether I was testifying, you were testifying, Chris was testifying, Jeff was testifying, whenever we were doing that, one of our things we always told them was, this has to be seamless. This is why we need our own network. This has to happen automatically and instantaneously. We can't wait for the cavalry to come over the hill. All right. Now, there were circumstances when we can anticipate additional need or additional capacity, and we do that. But in most cases, because of the nature of emergencies, we can't. That's why having FirstNet up and running full time, all the time, automatic prioritization on the network is key to the success of a public safety network.
Yeah, they, you get all these government reports about how things go wrong and what to fix them. We need a government report that says how well this went right. That FirstNet was absolutely the right thing to do at the right time, the right partner, it couldn't have played out really. Yeah, it could have. There's some things we would have changed if we could.
Yeah.
From a policy perspective and oversight, it would have been nice to see FirstNet Authority be truly independent.
Right.
But even with that said, it still is, everybody at FirstNet Authority did a great job. For the original board that you were on, did a great job at shepherding in the proposal and getting it off the ground initially. So at the end of the day, everybody worked through some of the impediments caused by a federal bureaucracy and got us to where we need to be, that we've got an independent contractor, at&t, building and operating the nation's only public safety broadband network, FirstNet.
Well, look, we always used to talk about why we did this. And the history of public safety is littered with examples of where the nation, Congress reacted to a disaster and said, this failed. We need to fix this, right? And so the whole notion of the concept, behind FirstNet was we needed to get out ahead of that for the first time in public safety's history. We needed to get out in front and say, we know there's going to be a disaster. We didn't know it would be a pandemic, right?
Right.
We didn't know what it would be, but we knew there would be one, and we knew we would need this network. And so by doing that ahead of the time, we're not sitting here going, talking about having congressional hearings, although they'll have congressional hearings, I'm sure, but the congressional hearings will not be focused on what were the communications issues? Why couldn't we communicate? Why couldn't we share information? Because that's happening, right? And that was one of our major goals with FirstNet when we started this, was let's get out in front of this so we don't have to have that embarrassment, that problem again. We didn't want to be in that situation, right?
Okay, so here's a question for you, Chuck.
Sure.
So right now, the federal government, through the Stafford Act, through the CARES legislation, they're pumping billions, equating to trillions over time, of federal taxpayer money into fixing PPEs, other equipment needed by the hospital systems and testing, and all the money they're spending. What aren't they spending money on? that they almost always have spent money on before.
Communications.
Right. That they made that $7.5 billion investment.
Mhm.
And today it's not costing them any more. It is a system that is self-sustaining with user fees, with investment from the private sector, in this case at&t. And this has taken that burden off the federal taxpayer and out of Congress, and they have permanently solved a problem.
Permanently solve a problem. That's a great point, is that it's not costing them anything. And the other thing is, you and I both know, and all you have to do is look at the experience post 9/11, right? If we hadn't done this and this didn't exist, this would be a big issue, right? It would be a major issue. And instead of approaching it rationally and taking care of it over the time, as we did with the whole FirstNet effort, Congress would turn around and just throw money at it. And throwing money at a problem, well, always helpful to be able to get money. Doesn't mean they would have done it right. The politicians, they panic in those situations, right? So they would have thrown money at it, and we don't know that money that they threw at it really would have made a difference, or made the right difference. Doing it this way, doing it right, doing it intelligently, doing it over time, and letting it evolve is the right way. And by the way, FirstNet is not perfect. We all three of us know that, right? It's not perfect, right? But it's there, and it's here to stay. And so what we can do is we can constantly tweak it. We can help it to evolve and get better and better and better over time. And because it's dedicated to public safety, we have the leverage to do that. You can't do that with other networks. You can ask, but they can say no. FirstNet, in my mind, can't say no to public safety. Over time, it has to say yes. It has to keep public safety happy, in effect. It has to evolve for them. And so by having a dedicated network, by making that original investment that Congress saw fit to do, puts us in a tremendously advantageous position, in my mind.
Yeah, and some of the commercial carriers seem to think one of the solutions for the future is to interconnecting the networks. Well, brings up the old term: if it's not broke, don't fix it. Don't screw this up. I mean, the fact is, they would create problems for FirstNet. As you and I both know, we intended, when we helped draft that legislation, a single nationwide network, one network. And so, part of the message is, I think, is let's not mess this up by bringing in other players. It is working as designed, as intended.
It is, and again, there are risks to doing that other thing. And again, the first risk that comes to my mind is, while they may have the best of intentions today, another entity, that could change 12 or 18 months from now. They may have a company priority or policy decision that changes that. FirstNet can't do that. at&t, as the contractor, can't do that. They are legally obligated to perform. They have to do it. So that makes it very different. And then there's the other issues of interconnectivity and network problems. And like, where is the problem? Is the problem in the FirstNet network? Is the problem in another network that's connected to the FirstNet core? Those are serious concerns from an operational performance perspective, from a cybersecurity perspective. I'll tell you this. I always go back to my experience at NYPD with our radio network. And by the way, I can't take credit for this, although I did help improve it, I think. But it was a damn good LMR system when I walked it through the door at communications back in 2000. And I didn't know much about it, but I learned as I went. And I learned how good a network it was, how reliable it was, how well maintained it was. The coverage was excellent. But then comes 9/11, and everybody comes in with this great idea of connecting other networks to your network. And the problem with that is that a lot of the surrounding networks to the NYPD's radio system just didn't have the level of performance and the level of maintenance that ours did. So we were reluctant and to do that, and I think we were kind of viewed as being a little bit selfish in some sense. But the truth of it is that, like the virus today spreading, right? If you bring another network into your network and that network has problems, it's got maintenance issues, it's got equipment issues, it's got compatibility issues. When you do that, you in effect infect your network with that network's problems when you connect those two networks.
Right.
So while we would do it on occasion, on a very limited basis, we would not do it on any kind of full-time basis, simply because we had no control over that other network.
Well, and you also operate at the lowest common denominator.
Right, and we had no visibility into that network.
Yep, exactly. Well, I suppose we could talk about this all day long.
Long time.
What we should be talking about here?
Let's talk about those Yankees, huh?
How about any kind of sports? Just
Yeah, and you know what?
normal.
Listen, I got to tell you,
Talk sports.
I don't know about
Sorry.
you guys, but this sitting in the house is getting kind of stale. You know what I mean? Going for long walks, maintaining social distancing and stuff. But you know, it's time for a hot dog at Yankee Stadium. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's all just hope that can happen before long,
Yeah,
for
Yeah.
sure. With something to look forward to. Well, we are running a little long, but it's been very informative, I think. And Chuck, it's been a pleasure to sit here and talk to you and hear your views on FirstNet and the Alliance and COVID. It's nice to have somebody to talk to that's sitting in the middle of it that can speak to if there was any communication issues. But as we've discussed, there really isn't, and that's a good thing. Dick, you too. It's been a pleasure. And I want to thank you both for being here, and maybe we can do it again sometime.
Thanks, Brent.
That'd be great.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.